celebrate the development, while others are accusing the U.S.
In the early hours before dawn, somewhere in the vast darkness of the sea, a single decision changes everything. What began as another tense standoff between United States and Iran suddenly crosses an invisible line. Radar screens light up, alarms sound, and for the first time in modern history, a U.S. aircraft carrier group faces a direct, deliberate missile challenge of unprecedented scale. According to unconfirmed but widely circulated reports, an advanced Iranian hypersonic missile, known as Fattah, is launched toward the heart of American naval power, the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln. Within minutes, speculation turns into shock. Military analysts argue over whether this launch was a warning, a miscalculation, or the opening move of something far larger. Governments go silent. Markets react. The world holds its breath. This is not just another headline. This scenario represents a nightmare long discussed behind closed doors in defense ministries and war colleges. An aircraft carrier is more than a ship. It is a floating symbol of dominance, protected by layers of escorts, satellites, and missile defenses. Challenging it directly sends a message not only to Washington, but to every global power watching closely. As the missile closes in, a battle unfolds that few civilians ever see. Defensive systems activate in seconds. Commanders are forced to choose between restraint and overwhelming force. Every response risks escalation. Every delay risks catastrophe. In this moment, modern warfare is no longer theoretical. It is fast, automated, and unforgiving. What makes this confrontation even more dangerous is what follows. Sources claim the United States responds with what officials later describe as a measured but decisive action. Warplanes scramble, naval assets reposition, cyber and electronic warfare systems reportedly go live. The objective is not just retaliation, but deterrence, to show that crossing this line carries immediate consequences. Yet here is the most unsettling question. What if none of this was meant to happen? What if a single launch, a misread signal, or a calculated show of force spirals beyond control? History has shown that major wars rarely start with formal declarations. They begin with moments like this: sudden, confusing, and irreversible. Media outlets rush to frame the story. Some call it the brink of war. Others dismiss it as exaggeration or psychological warfare. Official statements remain vague, carefully worded, and incomplete. But behind the language of diplomacy and press briefings lies a reality that cannot be ignored. The balance of power in the Middle East, and perhaps the world, may have shifted in a single night. In this video, we will break down this hypothetical confrontation step by step. What could have happened at sea? How would both sides likely react in the first critical hours? And why does this scenario matter even if it never officially occurred? Because sometimes, the most dangerous battles are not the ones that make history, but the ones that come close enough to remind us how fragile global stability really is. Tensions between United States and Iran did not emerge overnight. They are the result of decades of mistrust, failed negotiations, sanctions, covert operations, and a constant struggle for influence in the Middle East. In the months leading up to the alleged confrontation at sea, the atmosphere had grown noticeably heavier. Diplomatic channels remained open in name, but meaningful dialogue had stalled. New rounds of sanctions were imposed, naval patrols increased, and both sides intensified their military exercises, each claiming they were purely defensive. Yet behind these official explanations was a clear signal. Neither side was willing to back down. In early summer, U.S. naval activity in the region quietly expanded. The deployment of a carrier strike group was publicly described as routine, aimed at ensuring freedom of navigation and protecting international shipping lanes. Privately, however, several defense analysts suggested the move was meant to reassure allies and send a subtle warning to Tehran. At the same time, Iranian state media began emphasizing new missile capabilities and air defense systems, framing them as a response to foreign intimidation. Speeches by senior Iranian commanders became sharper in tone, increasingly focused on deterrence rather than diplomacy. The days immediately before the incident were marked by a series of small but telling events. An American reconnaissance drone reportedly flew closer than usual to Iranian-controlled airspace, prompting an official protest. Iranian naval units conducted a sudden exercise involving fast attack craft, simulating swarm tactics in narrow maritime corridors. None of these actions were unprecedented, but together they formed a pattern that suggested both sides were testing boundaries. Intelligence services on both ends reportedly raised alert levels, not because war was inevitable, but because the margin for error was shrinking. According to sources familiar with the situation, the turning point came during a single night of heightened alert. Regional command centers were already monitoring increased radar activity and electronic interference, a phenomenon not uncommon in contested waters. What made this night different was the accumulation of signals arriving almost simultaneously. Unusual missile unit movements detected inland, a spike in encrypted communications, and sudden changes in naval formations. None of these indicators alone confirmed hostile intent, but taken together, they created a sense of urgency that commanders could not ignore. It was in this atmosphere that the hypothetical confrontation began to take shape. From the American perspective, the priority was maintaining readiness without provoking an incident. Rules of engagement emphasized caution, yet allowed for immediate response if a direct threat emerged. On the Iranian side, officials later claimed that heightened alert status was purely precautionary, driven by fears of a surprise strike. Unofficially, some analysts believe a calculated show of force was intended to demonstrate capability rather than initiate combat. What makes this moment so critical is not just the actions taken, but the psychology behind them. Both sides believed they were acting defensively, while assuming the other was preparing something more aggressive. This mutual suspicion created a dangerous feedback loop. Each radar contact, each intercepted signal, each unexpected maneuver reinforced the belief that confrontation was becoming unavoidable. In such conditions, even a single ambiguous event could trigger a chain reaction. By the time the first reports of a missile launch began circulating, the situation had already been shaped by weeks of escalating pressure. Whether the launch was real, misinterpreted, or deliberately leaked information remains contested. What is clear is that the stage had been set long before any weapon was fired. The clash, real or hypothetical, was the product of accumulated tension, strategic signaling, and a shared belief on both sides that backing down might be seen as weakness. In modern geopolitics, that belief alone can be enough to push rivals dangerously close to open conflict. The moment the alleged attack begins is defined less by explosions and more by uncertainty. In the early hours of the night, far from any coastline, the carrier strike group centered around the USS Abraham Lincoln moved steadily through international waters. Officially, nothing about the situation is unusual. Aircraft are secured on deck, escort ships maintain formation, and watch rotations proceed as planned. Yet beneath the surface routine, tension is already present. Intelligence briefings earlier that evening had warned of increased Iranian missile readiness, though no specific launch window had been identified. As is often the case in such standoffs, the warning is taken seriously, but not urgently. The first sign that something is wrong does not come from a visual cue, but from data. A radar operator detects an anomaly, a brief spike that appears and vanishes within seconds. At first, it is dismissed as interference or a system glitch, a common occurrence in regions saturated with electronic activity. Moments later, a second signal appears, this time stronger and more defined. The track is inconsistent, accelerating faster than conventional aircraft or cruise missiles. Within the command center, the atmosphere shifts instantly. Conversations stop, screens are rechecked. A request for confirmation is sent through multiple channels. As additional sensors begin to align, a troubling picture starts to form. Analysts suggest the object's profile resembles that of a hypersonic missile, allegedly matching characteristics associated with Iran's Fattah system, a weapon Tehran has publicly claimed can evade modern missile defenses. While the true capabilities of such a system remain debated, the psychological impact is immediate. Hypersonic threats are not just faster, they compress decision-making time to seconds. There is no room for hesitation, and no certainty that existing defenses will perform as expected. On board the carrier, alarms are not yet sounded, but internal alert levels rise. Key personnel are summoned to their stations under coded instructions. Escort vessels adjust their spacing, subtly altering formation in ways invisible to the untrained eye. Somewhere deep within the ship, command officers weigh the consequences of every possible interpretation. Is this a test launch? A warning shot aimed wide of the group? Or a direct strike intended to send a message to Washington and its allies? According to later leaks, the missile's trajectory appears to shift mid-course, fueling confusion. Some officers believe this indicates a maneuvering warhead, while others argue it could be a sensor artifact or deliberate electronic deception. This disagreement underscores a critical reality of modern warfare. Technology provides information, but not certainty. Human judgment remains the final filter, and under extreme pressure, that judgment can falter. As seconds pass, the object continues to close the distance. Defensive systems are prepared but not yet engaged. The rules of engagement are clear but unforgiving. Firing too early could escalate the situation beyond repair, while waiting too long could prove disastrous. Commanders request final authorization, aware that their decision may be replayed and analyzed for decades, regardless of the outcome. Meanwhile, far from the ship itself, reports emerge that Iranian command centers are also on high alert. State media later claims the launch, if it occurred at all, was part of a controlled exercise meant to demonstrate deterrence rather than inflict damage. Western intelligence sources dispute this, pointing to the missile's path and timing as evidence of deliberate provocation. The truth, as often happens, lies somewhere in the fog between perception and intent. When the missile finally drops from radar coverage, no immediate impact is detected. Whether it was intercepted, diverted, or never aimed directly at the carrier remains unclear. What is certain is that the moment marks a psychological crossing point. For the first time, the abstract threat of advanced missile warfare feels immediate and personal to those on deck. The beginning of the attack, even without visible destruction, reshapes the confrontation. It proves that the distance between signaling and shooting is far smaller than anyone publicly admits, and that in modern conflicts, the most decisive battles may begin long before the first confirmed hit. As the situation evolves beyond the initial warning signs discussed earlier, the confrontation at sea enters a phase defined by rapid motion, incomplete information, and irreversible choices. The carrier strike group, anchored by the USS Abraham Lincoln, is no longer operating in a posture of passive monitoring. The assumption that time exists for deliberation begins to collapse. What unfolds next is not a single exchange, but a fluid sequence of actions and reactions that together form the core of the battle. Escort vessels widen their operational footprint, not dramatically, but just enough to reflect a shift from deterrence to active defense. Aircraft already airborne are redirected, their missions altered mid-flight as new priorities emerge. Electronic warfare systems begin to saturate the surrounding space with signals designed to confuse, delay, or mislead any further incoming threats. None of these actions are announced. They occur silently, coordinated through secure channels, reflecting doctrines refined over years of exercises and simulations. This is the rarely seen middle ground of modern warfare, where the absence of visible combat masks the intensity of what is actually happening. From the perspective of the command staff, the battle is as much cognitive as it is physical. Data streams pour in from satellites, airborne sensors, and allied assets across the region. Some reports contradict others. Some arrive too late to be useful. Analysts work in parallel, attempting to separate genuine threats from noise, all while knowing that their assessments may shape decisions with global consequences. This uncertainty becomes one of the defining characteristics of the engagement. Unlike traditional naval battles of the past, there is no clear front line, no single decisive clash. Instead, there is a constantly shifting picture that demands constant reassessment. The most critical moment arrives not with a confirmed strike, but with a convergence of indicators suggesting that restraint may no longer be sufficient. Signals intelligence points to elevated readiness levels on the Iranian side, while regional partners report unusual activity across multiple domains. Whether these moves are defensive or preparatory remains unclear, but the cumulative effect is unmistakable. For commanders operating under the authority of the United States, the concern is not only the safety of the carrier group, but the credibility of American deterrence. Allowing a perceived challenge to go unanswered carries its own risks, potentially encouraging further escalation. The response that follows is later described in official language as controlled and proportional. In practice, it is anything but simple. Precision strikes are reportedly authorized against select targets believed to be directly linked to the earlier threat, chosen specifically to avoid civilian infrastructure while still delivering a clear message. The exact nature of these actions remains classified, but multiple sources suggest they span more than one domain, combining conventional military force with cyber and electronic measures. The objective is not to destroy, but to disrupt and deter, to demonstrate capability without triggering a full-scale conflict. This calculated response marks the climax of the confrontation. It is the point at which signaling gives way to action, and where assumptions are tested against reality. Iranian officials later claimed that the American move confirms their long-held belief that U.S. naval deployments are inherently aggressive. American leaders counter that the response was unavoidable, framed as a necessary step to protect forces and uphold international norms. Both narratives are internally consistent, and both reinforce existing worldviews, making de-escalation more difficult rather than less. In the immediate aftermath, the tempo begins to slow, though tension remains high. Forces on both sides maintain elevated readiness, but no further direct exchanges occur. Diplomatic channels, previously strained, become active once more, albeit cautiously. Public statements are carefully crafted, emphasizing strength while leaving room for ambiguity. Behind the scenes, intermediaries work to clarify intentions and prevent misinterpretations from spiraling into renewed confrontation. The outcome of the battle, if it can be called that, is deliberately ambiguous. No ship is visibly damaged, no decisive victory declared. Yet the implications are profound. The engagement demonstrates how quickly a modern naval standoff can escalate, how narrow the margin for error has become, and how deeply technology has reshaped the nature of conflict. It also exposes a paradox at the heart of contemporary deterrence. The very systems designed to prevent war can, under the right conditions, accelerate its approach. For Iran, the episode reinforces the value of asymmetrical capabilities and strategic ambiguity. For the United States, it underscores both the power and vulnerability inherent in projecting force across vast distances. For the rest of the world, the confrontation serves as a reminder that global stability often rests on decisions made in moments of extreme pressure, by individuals who must act with incomplete information and under the weight of immense responsibility. In the end, the battle is remembered less for what was destroyed than for what nearly happened. It becomes a case study in how escalation works in the 21st century, not through massive offensives, but through brief, intense interactions that carry consequences far beyond their immediate scope. Even without a definitive conclusion, the confrontation alters calculations on both sides, reshaping future strategies and reinforcing the uncomfortable truth that in modern geopolitics, avoiding war can be just as complex and dangerous as fighting one. In the aftermath of the events described earlier, the absence of clear destruction does not translate into a return to normalcy. Instead, the confrontation leaves behind a strategic aftershock that continues to ripple through military planning rooms, diplomatic circles, and global markets. Both sides publicly downplay the incident, framing it as a contained episode that never crossed into open conflict. Privately, however, assessments paint a far more sobering picture. The episode is widely regarded as a near miss that exposed how quickly long-standing tensions between United States and Iran can approach a point of no return. One of the most immediate consequences is a reassessment of risk. Naval deployments in the region continue, but with altered patterns and heightened caution. Exercises are redesigned to account for compressed decision timelines and ambiguous threat indicators. Lessons drawn directly from what almost unfolded. Military planners quietly acknowledge that existing doctrines, built around clear warning phases and escalation ladders, may no longer reflect reality. The confrontation demonstrates that future crises may unfold in fragments rather than campaigns, making them harder to predict and even harder to control. Politically, the incident hardens positions on both sides. In Washington, it strengthens arguments for maintaining a robust forward presence, framed as essential for deterrence and alliance reassurance. In Tehran, officials point to the episode as proof that perceived vulnerability invites pressure, reinforcing investment in deterrent capabilities and strategic messaging. Neither side claims victory, yet both interpret the outcome in ways that validate their existing strategies. This mutual reinforcement is one of the most dangerous legacies of the clash, as it reduces incentives for compromise while increasing confidence in brinkmanship. Internationally, the reaction is mixed but attentive. Allies express relief that the situation did not escalate further, while quietly questioning how close the world came to a much wider conflict. Some regional actors accelerate their own defense planning, assuming that future confrontations may offer even less warning. Behind closed doors, diplomats warn that repetition of such incidents could normalize extreme risk-taking, making accidental escalation more likely over time. Perhaps the most significant impact is psychological. The confrontation enters military and academic discourse as a reference point, a scenario studied not for what happened, but for what almost did. Analysts emphasize that no formal declarations were made, no red lines publicly crossed, yet the strategic consequences are real. Trust erodes further, assumptions harden, and communication becomes more cautious and indirect. Each side learns that the other is willing to operate closer to the edge than previously assumed. In the months that follow, efforts at de-escalation surface intermittently, often overshadowed by renewed rhetoric or unrelated regional crises. The memory of the incident lingers, shaping how signals are sent and received. Even routine maneuvers are now interpreted through the lens of that night, increasing the risk of miscalculation while simultaneously encouraging restraint. Ultimately, the outcome of the confrontation is not defined by damage or casualties, but by altered expectations. It serves as a warning that modern conflicts may no longer announce themselves clearly, and that the line between deterrence and disaster can be perilously thin. The episode does not resolve the rivalry between the United States and Iran, it deepens it, embedding a shared awareness that the next crisis may unfold even faster, and with far less room for error.